call the meeting back to order. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you before you're speaking or ask any question directly by a member. For those participating by video conference, click the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair and pursuant to Standing Orders 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee back on Thursday, September 18, 2025. The committee is resuming its study on business risk management programs in Canada agriculture sector. We do have some witnesses. I did notice that in my comments here there was nothing about the microphones and earpieces. Please, keep your earpieces away from the microphone. Try not to speak too close to the microphone, is to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters who work so hard. And if you do have any questions, there is a QR code you can see on the card. Are the cards still circulating around here?
Well,
no. Uh-oh. We need those cards back. So I've been making reference to the QR codes, but I don't see any. So we'll get those back on. If you do have any questions about process when it comes to the microphone, please let me know. Joining us here today is Mr. Atkins. He's the CEO of Agriculture Credit Corporation. From the Union des Producteurs Agricoles is Charles Felix Ross, who's the General Manager, and National Circle for Indigenous Agriculture and Food, Chris McKee. Thank you so much. He is the Vice President of Business Development. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we'll go into rounds with each of the respected parties. Why don't we start with Mr. McKee?
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invite to appear here today. As mentioned, Chris McKee, Senior Vice President of Business Development of the National Circle for Indigenous Agriculture and Food. And we're just excited to have this opportunity. Indigenous peoples represent the fastest growing demographic in Canada. They are increasingly active in agriculture, food production, and land stewardship. Indigenous agriculture has become one of the fastest growing segments in the sector, yet remains underrepresented in a lot of current BRM programming. As we outlined in a recent submission to the Prime Minister and Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada on the next policy framework, there's a clear opportunity and a necessity to ensure that Indigenous agriculture be fully included in the next suite of programs. Today, many Indigenous producers face compound risks, climate volatility, limited access to capital, infrastructure gaps, and challenges navigating these important program requirements. If the BRM program is to achieve its intended outcomes, they're most likely to reflect diversity of producers and ensure equitable access and meaningful participation. Just a few key messages that I kind of wanted to highlight as we go through is that Indigenous inclusion and equitable access, the inclusion embedded as a core pillar and not just an add-on through this suite of programs. Designed with Indigenous producers, not for them. We'd recommend dedicated funding streams tailored to Indigenous agriculture with a fund that works integral through all, that includes Indigenous-led agriculture, food projects, business acquisition, product expansion, capacity building, and supply chain development. Climate resiliency and modernization of risk management, just to make sure that we evolve to reflect the realities of climate change and moving from reactive compensation towards proactive risk mitigation. Third piece we wanted to touch on is market development with infrastructure and regional realities. These risks extend beyond production. It's also tied to markets and infrastructure. There's a strong and growing demand for Indigenous producers and Indigenous branded products, both domestically and internationally. However, these producers are often limited by gaps in processing capacity, cold storage, transportation, and infrastructure. Fourth, highlight workforce and technology enablement. Workforce and technology are integral to managing that risk. Labor shortages continue to impact productivity, particularly in the rural and remote regions where housing and transportation challenges persist. At the same time, inconsistent access to broadband and digital infrastructure limits the adoption of precision ag and data systems. And finally, The fifth, in strengthening the FPT framework, a more coordinated and transparent outcome-driven, and we recommend the clearly defined policy outcomes with measurable targets, greater clarity in the roles and responsibilities across jurisdictions, transparent report to track progress and impact, and it's equally important to ensuring Indigenous participation in program design and delivery through formalized mechanisms, including the FPT Indigenous agriculture tables. In closing, strengthening the BRM programs is more than about managing risk. It's about building a more inclusive, resilient, and competitive ag sector. By embedding Indigenous inclusion, modernize risk management tools, investing in infrastructure and workforce, Canada can position itself for the sector for long-term success. Prime Minister Carney established a strategy to position Canada as a global agriculture and food superpower, with the goal of contributing to global food security by 2050. It focuses on expanding food production rather than exporting raw commodities, with the target of adding over $45 billion in annual GDP over the next decade. Indigenous agriculture is a critical part of that future to meet this goal. The NCIF stands ready to work with federal, provincial, and territorial partners to co-design solutions that advance competitiveness, resilience, and reconciliation. Thank you.
Mr. McKee, for your important presentation. We appreciate it. We'll next go to Mr. Atkins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to address the committee today regarding business risk management programs, and my particular focus on the advanced payments program and the ability and the agri-stability and production insurance. My name is Jay Atkins, and for the last 15 years, I've been the Chief Executive Officer at Agricultural Credit Corporation, which most of you know as ACC. We are a not-for-profit organization established in 1992 and led by a board of directors with 22 member organizations. ACC administers a commodity loan program and the ginseng loan program in Ontario, as well as the advanced payments program, which we administer in Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and parts of Alberta. ACC has administered the advanced payments program for over 3 decades, 34 years to be exact. As the second largest administrator in Canada, we anticipate providing approximately $1.1 billion in lending for the current year to more than 5,000 producers and ranchers. These funds enable producers to finance critical stages of production, including planting, growing, harvesting, and marketing of their commodities in a manner that optimizes financial outcomes. At ACC, we continue to expand our reach, particularly in the current lending environment, where we see traditional financial institutions are adopting a more cautious approach to agricultural financing. The value of this program is clearly demonstrated through engagement with producers at industry events. Many have indicated that without access to the advanced payments program, their operations would not be viable. This program is also well suited to young and beginning producers, and it encourages participation in agri-stability and agri-insurance, thereby enhancing risk management and financial viability. Nationwide, the advanced payment programs deliver operating capital to nearly 30,000 farmers and ranchers through its 28 administrators, and is certainly an attractive alternative in the current financing marketplace. We at ACC believe, however, there are key opportunities to strengthen its effectiveness and its delivery. First, we recommend establishing a permanent interest-free threshold of $350,000 under the program. This proposed adjustment reflects a continuous market increase in input costs, including fertilizer, seed, chemicals, fuel, labor, and equipment maintenance. Making this interest-free threshold permanent would provide a much-needed certainty for both producers and administrators, replacing the current annual process where the limit reverts to the legislated $100,000 unless otherwise announced by the Minister of Agriculture. The current lack of predictability complicates planning and program utilization. Late announcements delay the producer applications as they await a possible announcement, and this delay frequently requires administrators to revisit and revise previously issued loans. At ACC, for example, this can involve reprocessing up to approximately 2,000 loans, resulting in increased administrative costs and delays in delivering funds to producers. Secondly, we wish to raise concerns regarding the revised credit guidelines introduced by Agriculture and Agri-Food in 2024. The requirements for these loans now exceed those typically applied for when you're applying at a commercial financial institution, and increases both the complexity and duration of loan processing without any demonstrable improvements in risk or default outcomes. For instance, the portion of applicants requiring full adjudication for us has increased at ACC from approximately 25% to 73%. While intended to strengthen oversight, these changes have instead introduced significant administration burden with limited or no benefit in terms of reducing default rates. Finally, we encourage the committee to also recognize that administrators rely on assignments over agri-stability and production assurance as security for the advanced payments program. Any changes in these programs may have direct implications for our ability to use them effectively as security instruments, and any changes require careful consideration that needs to be taken. Having said all this, ACC believes that the Advanced Payments Program is one of the best programs out there. It is our goal to continue to provide to as many producers as possible across Canada this program, which allows them to continue farming and ranching operations. Thank you for your consideration, Mr. Chairman. I'd be pleased to respond to any questions the committee has.
That was perfect timing. You hit 5 minutes perfectly.
Oh, you don't want to give them
well,
a
that was
mic,
impressive.
Mr.
Thank you very
Chairman.
much. Next, we'll go to Mr. Charles Felix Ross for 5 minutes.
Merci. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, thank you for giving us the opportunity to contribute to your work on the effectiveness of agricultural risk management programs in a context marked by increasingly intense climate change and growing geopolitical uncertainties. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Union des producteurs agricoles, which represents more than 42,000 farm workers in Quebec, and I'm executive director. Our message is simple. To ensure the resilience and long-term sustainability of the Canadian agricultural sector, it is essential to significantly strengthen risk management programs and to adapt public tools to today's and tomorrow's realities. First, allow me to recall a fundamental observation. Public support for agriculture in Canada remains lower than that observed in several comparable countries. While the international average is around 2% of government expenditures, Canada currently devotes less than 1% to its agriculture. In a context where climate, economic, and geopolitical risks are intensifying, this gap is no longer sustainable. We therefore recommend that the federal government commit to gradually increasing its investments in agriculture to 2% of public expenditures. This enhancement must primarily serve to strengthen business risk management programs, which constitute the first line of defense for producers facing shocks. In this regard, the Agri-Stability Program must be substantially improved. The current trigger threshold does not adequately cover the losses incurred by agricultural businesses. We recommend raising this threshold to 85% of the reference value. Such a measure would provide more realistic protection and would allow businesses to deal with weather difficulties without compromising their long-term viability. Next, it is essential to review the agri-recovery framework. Extreme weather events, whether droughts or floods, are multiplying, and their financial impacts are immediate and often devastating. However, the implementation timelines for agri-recovery initiatives are too long. Producers need rapid, predictable, and field-adapted support. We therefore recommend simplifying the intervention mechanisms and accelerating the payment of compensation. Furthermore, the agri-insurance program must become more flexible. Agricultural realities vary considerably from one region to another, particularly due to climatic conditions, types of production, and business structures. It is therefore crucial to give provinces the full latitude necessary to adapt crop insurance coverage to the specific risks faced by their producers. A more flexible approach will allow the relevance and effectiveness of the protections offered. These adjustments are essential to better respond to crises when they occur. However, they must be part of a broader vision that also includes the prevention of risks in the medium and long term. In this regard, research and technology transfer play a central role. Climate change requires profound adaptations in agricultural practices, improved soil management techniques, diversification of production, and innovations in water management, to name just a few. Living laboratory initiatives are particularly effective tools as they allow concrete solutions to be tested and deployed directly on farms in collaboration with producers. However, these initiatives remain underfunded, especially following the recent cuts to research budgets at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Increased investment in applied research and knowledge transfer is indispensable to enable the Canadian agricultural sector to adapt effectively to climate challenges. Finally, I wish to emphasize the importance of taking into account regional realities and the needs of small and medium-sized farms. These businesses form the heart of our agricultural fabric and play an essential role in the vitality of our territories. Federal programs must be designed to be accessible, adapted, and effective for all producers, regardless of their size or location. In conclusion, strengthening the resilience of Canadian agriculture requires clear choices. Invest more, better protect producers' incomes, improve the speed of interventions in time of crisis, provide flexible tools adapted to regional realities, and support innovation to anticipate future challenges. The agricultural sector is a strategic pillar of our economy and our food security, and also of our national security. It deserves tools equal to the risks it is going to face. Thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll go to the Conservatives for 6 minutes. Okay, Mr. Gord.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Ma question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is going to be for Mr. Ross from the Quebec Farmers Union, UPA. You have said that the cuts in research and the research centres that have been cut almost everywhere in Canada, especially in Quebec, we're talking about here risk analysis. So if there was a possibility of improving viability and profitability of farms, some researchers told us anywhere between 10 to 15% better yields in crops. I'm talking especially about forage crops, but it could be elsewhere. And that is part of what risk management is. But if we put less money in research, we might find ourselves with more costly insurance programs. Wouldn't it be better to prevent rather than to cure? Well, you're absolutely right. We need good programs to manage risk. The FAO came out with a report last week saying precisely that climate change is a reality, and we're going to have flooding and droughts, and this is going to mean 500 billion hours of work. Concretely, we're talking loss of crops and yield. So yes, we can work on risk management, and of course we need good progress, but we especially need to prevent what is going to happen, and to prevent and to adapt, we need to invest in research, and agricultural companies need to invest in new systems, irrigation, new kinds of greenhouses, anything for anything to do with soils, quality soils. We have to think about new ways of doing things. So a living laboratory was a real tool. It is a tool that we need in order to adapt ourselves to this reality. So yes, preventing, of course, is much better than curing. So in the advanced payment program, I had a lot of farmers who said it's too rigid, it's not flexible enough, and other comments. Is there any way of making that program more universal? Because 30% of farmers in Quebec can only 30% can use it, and they always have to haggle between their institutions, and they can't get their own banks. It would be so much simpler. Especially when it came to the interest. Well, I'm also an administrator or director at AAC, and I was invited to be part of their board of directors. So I must disclose this to the members here. But our position at UPA is pretty much the same as AAC. we need to maintain and statute in time the without interest portion of 350,000. If we're stable and we don't change things every year, then we're giving the farmers a message of stability, and companies will adjust and they'll say, okay, we've got the 350,000 or another amount without interest, and then they'll work with their financial institutions. And this will mean more compliance and more forecasting or predictability within the context of the program. Now, concerning guarantees, well, that's always, this program's existed for decades, and there is a share in the guarantees, and the financial institutions are often not very willing to share the guarantee. But if there's an economic advantage for the company, then generally speaking, the banker will be a co-signer. And that's the case right now because interest rates are higher. So it's a true advantage for the companies to get onto the program. Yes. And what about these BRMs? Do they take into account production costs? And in the near future, how could we improve those BRMs programs for certain productions that are below the cost of production? Well, via Agri-Stability program, it's important to have a plan. Because it's not necessary to guarantee 100%, but we need to minimally guarantee something that is going to take into account all of the main expenses a company has. So there could be 2 or 3 bad years for various reasons that are completely beyond the control of the farmer, like climate, geopolitical problems, whatnot. And then they have no more margin, and they don't have that security net. So we need to guarantee minimally a plan for major expenses or main expenses. There isn't a single program in Canada that guarantees 100% of the production, but we could have, via agri-stability and improvements to agri-stability, a better ceiling, a better intervention threshold. So is there anything that you would like to talk about in terms of agri-stability? Well, we would like it to get back to what it used to be, guaranteeing 85% of the margin of guarantee and also have a threshold. Thank you very much.
Duran for 6 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, merci à vous.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And thank you very much for taking part in this study. I'd like to start, Mr. McKee, with you. As you said, Indigenous peoples are not well represented in agriculture. So we haven't heard enough about the issues that they face. And what I have heard is that programs are not well adapted because understanding agriculture in terms of Indigenous context is not something that is well understood. Could you explain a little bit more?
Yes, thank you. I think the biggest thing is they're not understood, but oftentimes we look at primary agriculture as agriculture. And in Indigenous communities, that may be traditional harvesting, that might be a greenhouse or a community garden just to get that food security and food sovereignty back in place. And oftentimes the programming is fit for a conventional financial benchmarks, and those benchmarks don't exist in a lot of communities just due to, you know, I can think of certain programs that want the financial farming income and expense claim that was submitted for income tax, and nations don't submit those same forms. So therefore, the first checkbox on eligibility is, oh, we're not eligible, we just move on. And I think, you know, the more voices that are around the table in the creation of those programs, instead of after to say, oh, by the way, here's a suite of programs, this would be great for you to use, and they see the first 3 boxes, they're not eligible, or seen as not eligible, and then they just move on, and it's not looked at.
On a des grands problèmes de sécurité alimentaire chez les communautés.
We have real needs for food sovereignty and food security in Indigenous communities. Do you think that improving these BRMs could encourage Indigenous communities to further invest in agriculture?
Absolutely. I mean, any more inclusion in the right suite of tools, and then also looking at what is the financial stability in those tools that are sustainable. A one-time injection or one conversation is not going to move the dial in that space. It has to be a concerted effort that is stabilized over time, not a one and done, but more on let's get around the table, let's start the conversations, and then let's grow not only the food sector in those communities, but for the country as a whole. Like, there's a real opportunity, and we've seen in over 60 projects that we're involved in across the country of just the excitement of kids getting their hands back in the dirt. And it's invigorating, but also to meet our goal by 2050, we have to involve all pieces of that puzzle.
Merci beaucoup et je vais me tourner vers Monsieur Ross. Monsieur Ross, vous...
Mr. Ross, you really understand all of the different BRM programs that exist, and you said what you'd like is to reinforce the BRM programs because people talk about change, major changes. Do you think that the suite of programs that is offered, generally speaking, is sufficient to cover all of the risks and it should be adapted? Or are you thinking about more major changes that could happen within the BRM suite? I think we've got some good programs, but we could improve them. Let's say agri-stability. We could have a threshold of expenses. For instance, we don't allow for a reference margin. For instance, it mustn't go below the various expenses of the company. There's a way of introducing into that a spending cap, or because in the past we've tried to say to the producers is you need to go be good managers. They are good managers, but they can't manage a war. They cannot manage climate change. So for me, this is one of our claims. We need a cap or a threshold because in the really good years, we would compensate for profits, but we could have a cap also inside of agri-stability. In Quebec, we have something called Agri-Quebec Plus. So this is on top of agri-stability, and we guarantee 85% of the margin of reference, but there is a cap. So in agri-stability, it means because we have this extra program, almost everybody subscribes to this program. So it's less, whereas in Canada, the rest of Canada, it's less than 40%. So if you improve the support level via extra programs or the program itself, then people have buy-in. And that is the request that we are making to improve agri-stability. What about agri-recuperation? It's administratively, yes, sorry, I only have 30 seconds. Since you're talking about agri-recovery, are you aware of the deployments that have been made? Oh, sorry, I have to give, maybe somebody else will answer, let you answer the question. Yes, sorry about that.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur...
Thank you, Mr. Ross. And thank you, Mr. Ross, for having accepted our invitation this morning. It's always a pleasure to see you. And you've been extremely concise and clear in your remarks. Agricultural producers are active people. They want things to move. But when it comes to the government, we talk, we consult. But you have made very clear requests. You said we need to improve the programs. So the next durable partnership needs to invest money in program and put more money in the programs. And it has to be the key words it is. So we've been full predictability, stability, and rapidness. When can we act to make sure to have all of these three elements together? Well, first of all, the budgets. I said this in my introduction. When it comes to budget, we put less than 1% of the total federal budget. So we are at less than $4 billion only for agriculture. And we need a goal of becoming a powerhouse, a super agro food business powerhouse. And we need to be on the same level as the Americans and other countries in the OECD. So if we want to improve our competitivity and the competitivity of our international businesses, we need to get better budgets. And with those extra budgets, we will be able to invest into better programs, improve income security programs, and also in research, development, technology transfers for agri-food and agribusinesses. Because right now, the agri-food business sector is underfinanced. I'm not trying to discredit what the parliamentarians have tried to do so far. I've participated in MPAC committees 15 years ago, and we had the same discussions 15 years ago, same ones that we're having now, whether it was with public accounts or finance. So I feel like we're just going around in circles. We need, first of all, to improve the agricultural sector. And when we have the means to do so, and we have the money, well, all of a sudden you become super creative, super efficient, and you find ways to improve the system. So you're saying that agriculture is also a question of sovereignty. It's a national sovereignty issue, and we need to recognize this spending as being expenses that will eventually come to fruition. Mr. Ross, you know I worked at the UPA for 2 years, and it was my impression, and I think it was very much shared, that a lot of the risks, well, the risks are on the shoulders of the farmers then and now. We ask them to manage risks that go way beyond just the climate change or just the weather with tools that are not adapted. I remember in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, where I live, we've got 50K between weather stations, and it's a lottery for the farmers. And some of them decide to belong to this program or not belong to this program because it was optional. And sometimes they didn't need it, and then they needed it. And there are years when they really needed it and they didn't get it. So it was a problem. So you add to this geopolitical conflicts like Hormuz Straits and all of that. And so this is not forecastable. The flooding in the south of Quebec or the drought in my area and wildfires. So we always feel that the help is insufficient and it doesn't trigger what they need, especially long term. So you've talked about this problem. Now, is there an emergency here wouldn't we need an emergency fund for things that are not forecastable? Well, we often go to the US and we go and listen to our USDA friends, and very often the minister there comes to give speeches, and every year he says, and even Mr. Trump says so, that agriculture is a question of national security. Feeding people is a national security. And there are, of course, geopolitical issues and climate change issues that put everything at risk. I don't want to repeat what I already said, but budgets are simply not what they should be. And we have saluted the Carney's government's decision to suspend the excise tax on fuel, but 4 cents they're going to save on their diesel is going to mean $1 million in savings for the agricultural sector. And if the cost of fuel increases by 30%, which is the case, and if fertilizers increase by 30%, and they say they're going to double by the fall if this conflict continues, well, that means $300 million in a bill. And that is just for the farming businesses in Quebec. They have a little bit of margin of maneuver, but, oh, whoops, there's a problem internationally. And all of a sudden, $13 million, and it's going to cost our businesses $300 million was extra. So if we really want to help the businesses, we really want to have a strong, competitive farming sector, we need to help our farmers, and we need to share the risk of these conflicts and the climate change. Yes, it's true. And what we have seen is there is a lack of long-term vision because we find ourselves we know that the soil and climate and so many things are affected, and farmers are not necessarily capable of dealing with all of this. I'll get back to you in a little bit.
Chair, and appreciate everybody's attendance. Mr. Atkins, you were talking about mainly the APP, but we had a farmer here yesterday on Tuesday talking about the cumbersome, burdensome process of even just applying for agri-stability. His bill from his account, I think he said, was $7,000 just for the paperwork for agri-stability. And you were talking about the changes that were made in 2024. Is there a better way of doing this that is not putting all of this onus in terms of the costs and the paperwork on the producer themselves? That seems to be a significant impediment, let's say, where agri-stability, for example, is at an enrollment or subscription rate of around 30%.
Thank you for the question, sir. From our organization, we do everything electronically. We fill out the application with the producer. We go through everything he needs to do other than the agri-stability. He ends up having to apply for that. I think that many of us have gone in and purchased automobiles in the last period of time, year, 2 or 3 years. You sit there 4 or 5 minutes, maybe 10. You talk to the person, they do a quick credit check, they do a credit score on you, and off you go with car funded. And most of those cars, or a lot of those cars, a lot of money and close to the size of many producers borrow from us. And when we look at having to do, adjudication on 75% of the loans, where you will have a producer who's borrowed from us since 1993, never missed a payment, never missed the paperwork being submitted for receipts, never missed any of the guidelines associated with it, and you're having to do a full accredit adjudication on this person, seems to me unreasonable. These are people that any one of us in here would write a check to help them with their organization. So for our standpoint, it's much more complicated than it has to be. We look at companies, we look at our competitors, we look at all the financial institutions, Farm Credit, we look at credit unions and all the steps that they're going through to provide credit. And there is no question in my mind that what we're doing today is exorbitant. And that results in costs to the producer. I'd love to drop our application fee to zero. It results in time. When people are applying, for example, right now we've got about 100 loans a day coming in. Okay, those producers need money. It's time for fertilizer, it's time for chemicals, it's time for seed, it's time to get on the ground if it ever gets warm enough. And these producers need the cash now, and we need to turn that money around as quick as possible.
Yeah.
If I can just add one thing,
yeah.
We run into a problem in regards to the agri-stability around the fact that we do administer in British Columbia the Advanced Payments Program, where you look at producers out there and ranchers who've had 4 years of losses because of drought, smoke, fire, flood, just keep going, everything except locusts. And certainly the agri-stability needs to be changed to address those people, because each lost year results in a reduction of your reference margin. And we had an example 2 weeks ago where the gentleman produces $1 million worth of product a year and his reference margin is $2.76.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Ack, I've only got about a minute left. I wanted to go to Mr. McKee. Thank you for that. I'm very proud to represent the Blood Tribe Kainai in my riding. It's done an amazing job growing their agricultural business, and Kainai Forge, for example, selling forage around the world. But I'm just curious from your perspective, is it difficult for First, you're talking about access for First Nations in terms of getting into agriculture. With their land ownership and how things work, is it difficult, or are they able to access some of these BRM programs like agri-stability or even agri-recovery? Would it be done as chief and council as a whole, or are these programs need to be modified to ensure that they have an even opportunity to access these programs? Just maybe for my lack of understanding there, if you can.
20 seconds left.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is. They don't have the same access points to these programs as traditional producers. Is the easiest answer. They're not set up for chief and council to look at. They're not set up for ECDEV to look at, and oftentimes the land that's being farmed is still got title to the Crown. They're not even titled to the nation themselves. Therefore, they're collecting, potentially trying to collect payment on land that actually isn't titled to them.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the Liberals. MP Harrison for 5 minutes.
Thank you to all the witnesses for your invaluable knowledge and supporting producers. Mr. McKee, I represent two First Nations, Curve Lake and Hiawatha. And in June, I was actually in Curve Lake, and they've created an incredible Curve Lake aquaponics, where they have tilapia on one side and their beautiful greenhouse on the other, and they're producing an incredible amount for their community, and also have expanded enough to be able to sell to the outside. So I've seen firsthand also, getting our youth back, getting their hands into the soil so they can understand nature and respect it and appreciate it, and what a vital role Indigenous peoples play in that, and their understanding of nature and working with it and not against it and supporting it. So I think similar to Mr. Barlow's questioning, which is, would you like to speak more specifically to some recommendations you would like to see in this report that would better support your efforts?
Thank you. I think, the biggest thing is we always hear consultation. Enough consultation. Let's co-design these programs with those producers around the table so that the voices are there and they can be heard. And there are many, many examples, from the Blood Tribe to the Hiawatha to Member 2 to nations that have been resilient enough to drive that change. But at the end of the day, we need to put things in place to get the ball rolling in a lot of nations and a lot of stuff. So I come from a Centennial family farm, southern Saskatchewan farm kid. My education into agriculture was getting pulled out of bed at 2:30 in the morning because my arm was longer than my dad's and we had a calf to get out. That generational knowledge isn't in a lot of communities to be able to do that. So we talk about business risk management, but without the investment and the education and a dedicated fund to actually get off the ground, we all know what we need: land, labor, and capital. Millions of acres that have First Nations access across the country, the fastest growing demographic, but can't access programs in capital because they're designed and written for my farm, not for every farm.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I actually was explaining to one of my colleagues in the last week. They were driving, I believe, here, and they were driving by farm fields, and they said, where are the rocks in the fields? I'm seeing all these fields, and where are the rocks? And so I grew up on a farm, and I still farm today. And I said, we picked them. And he was like, pardon? And I said, well, your dad drives behind you in the tractor, and you pick the rocks. And then I made a joke that you throw enough at your siblings, and then they ask you to stop picking rocks. And so he was like, they pick rocks. And I said, yeah, where do you think? And I said my grandparents used horses to pull, the roots from trees out to create these fields. And I think a large piece of that is this unknown lifestyle that we are incredibly privileged and grateful to live. It's not understood. So you're speaking to all these, exactly what we need, right? Is that we have to bring things back and get our youth and young people and everyone who wants to be involved, because food is national security, unequivocally. And so really broadly, I don't know if I have much time left, to Mr. Ross or to Mr. Atkins, I think on this committee, and I'm new here to government, is that could you just specifically speak to some things you'd like to see? Because I think we spend a lot of time, I'm even taking too much time talking right now, but specifically, if you could give us some recommendations that would help your producers, I'd like to give you the floor and opportunity to speak to any of those.
Thank you for that opportunity. I'll do it real quick because Mr. Ross will probably have something he'd like to add to this. Certainly for us, the stability around the advanced payments program, we need that. Getting an announcement April 1st when the date that we're going to kick out $700 million is April the 1st is not a good way to present the program. Number one. Number two is I think that that number needs to be fixed because it needs to be permanent, because it needs to, we plan. We provide budgets, farmers provide budgets, and you can't provide that budget when they do go to the bank because they don't know what they're going to need until that announcement takes place. So from our standpoint, that's really important. Number two is I think the agri-stability program has to be changed to affect more than a single year loss. I think it's got to look at areas where you may have 2 or 3 years of losses due to climate, due to market, due to politics, due to a number of different things. And I think that's got to be encouraged. I also think, as Mr. Ross said this morning, there needs to be the investment into that. We don't need to do it halfway. We need to do it all the way. Food, we talked about food security here this morning. Absolutely. And it's required.
Thank you. We'll go to the block for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Il y a Monsieur
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ross.
de la visite du ministre.
A few weeks ago, when Minister McDonald was visiting, I brought up the question of the interest-free limit for the advance payment program, which is currently $350,000. Because this is an exceptional measure, it will go back to a lesser amount, and we're told that we're not going to maintain the new amount, so it's going to go back to $100,000. And we recommended that this level be maintained, but it seems that the government isn't listening to us. So do you think that we should recommend that this amount be increased, and what is the importance of this program in the current context? I would like to say that I supported all of the recommendations from Mr. Atkins. So I share his point of view. And to answer your question, we're asking that the $350,000 threshold interest-free be maintained. And the current capital cost for all agricultural businesses and interest rates have increased a lot over the last number of years. Their agricultural producers are renewing their loans. And it's in Quebec a few years ago, we're talking about $4 or $5 million in interest, but today the cost of agricultural debt in Quebec is $1.3 billion. So it's enormous. So if we need to have short-term credit through the advance payment program, and this is an important tool for our businesses. And yes, we'd like to see the amount maintained at $350 interest-free. This should be done on a permanent basis. So I'm going to ask a question related to my colleagues' questions whose grandparents who collected rocks, and that's also the case in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, that were about 100 years ago. And when all the drainage and land management programs were done, and of course now we're not at the same level, so we don't necessarily have access to these programs at the right time. So sure, the government put into place specific programs for northern regions, including indigenous communities, in order to make up for the lost time. And should this be part of the new partnership? Yes. And we're asking for 2% of the federal budget. And that would mean that we'd be able to invest $10 billion per year in agricultural programs. So that's the request that we're making to the federal government, $10 billion to support agriculture. And yes, the improvement of income security programs, and as well support and investments to business. If we want to keep up with our competitors, we need to invest. Yes, risk management is important, but we also need to support investment and support the transfer of businesses.
We'll go to the Conservatives for Mr. Bonk for 4 minutes, and then we'll finish off with the Liberals. Go ahead.
All right. I'd like to talk a little bit today about cross-compliance and environmental programs, if I could. And we know that there's a lot of overlap between the two. And if we just take a look at some of the examples from the past, so farmers in general are some of the most environmentally conscious people you'll ever meet, because we make our living from the health of our soil and from our. We understand our farms, we understand the climate that we operate in, and I can just give you a quick example. For example, there's a Grasslands National Park in my area, where some well-meaning scientists in Ottawa decided that there was overstocking and it was hurting the grasslands. They removed the livestock. Everything got worse. You double the amount of livestock because it's part of the ecosystem. It's how our native prairie soils evolved. Things got better. Maybe for Mr. Atkins, if I could ask you, what are some of the things you're hearing from your clients about cross-compliance and how it's hurting them when they're trying to apply for some of these programs?
In some of the programs, I think what we're seeing, as my colleague here mentioned this morning, there are restrictions that are in place that you may not fit into that funnel exactly, and those things can force people out of the program extremely quickly. I think in regards to cross compliance on them, the programs I think today do work well as far as the business risk management programs work well together. Although, as Mr. Ross said too, of course, the funding could be improved. I think there's an educational component to this that no one's really spoke about this morning as well. And I think there has to be an opportunity to apply for or allow for exemptions in specific cases. And those arise, every farm is not, maybe we all did pick rocks, which was a character builder. But on the other hand, each farm is different, and we need that exemption area. So,
quickly here, I'll just go back to the reference margin. So I know you worked in FCC prior to your career here, and so you understand Saskatchewan well and the Palasha Triangle. Right now, they're in their 7th year of where they're qualifying for these programs. As you know, the reference margin is affected by that. How would you like to see that change so it could better help the producers who need it?
I think there has to be some form of a baseline there. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, we've had producers in BC that have had 4 lost years. Their reference margin is 0 for all intents and purposes. Well, certainly, if we're lending on reference margin, what do we do? How do we adjust for that? And I think there has to be an opportunity. As I mentioned, we have a gentleman who farms, sells $1 million worth of product. His reference margin is $2.78. So when he brings it in, we're lending on reference margin for this gentleman. What do we do with that? Has always been a good producer in years where the crop was off. Of course, when you have losses, it doesn't work. And I think for things like catastrophes, for Mother Nature, there has to be a way around that, because he came to us and we said we can't do anything. And we've talked with the Agri-Stability folks, and they said we can't do anything because that's just the way the program is.
Just got time for one more question, I
Yes,
think,
sir.
here. I'm going to ask really quickly on Agri-Invest. So right now it's at 1% of sales, and we all understand that that's almost useless at the moment, and producers want to look after themselves and not rely on these programs. So there has been a suggestion to move it to 3%, which no one's moved on that yet. What do you think would be the right amount for that?
You're 15 seconds over. A really short answer, please.
I think the 3% is a good area to be aiming for. 1% doesn't do much.
Thank you so much. We'll go to the Liberals for 4 minutes. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. Thank you for being here for this important study, and thank you for your advice as we move forward in this process. Our first question for Mr. McGee: do you have any recommendations on how we can better include Indigenous voices in the development of programs? Because as you mentioned, we need to make sure that programs can assist communities before the program is finalized, because otherwise it's too late. So do you have any concrete suggestions? And if you have some today, that's great. But if you'd like to send us any by writing afterward, that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, an easy step one is, for the last 2 years, there's a national organization that has a lot of connection with those communities, and we'd be happy to speak into the programs. Put us around the table. Let us reach out and talk to the stakeholders and the ones that are going to be utilizing these programs, so that there's that common voice that actually is around the table, as opposed to trying to talk to a nation in BC and you're going to get a different answer from a nation in Quebec or Ontario, because agriculture doesn't look the same across the country. We all know that. Well, let's work at being intentional and doing it around the table right now, starting today. Yeah.
Merci beaucoup. Puis on ne prend.
Thank you very much. And we have taken note of your suggestion. Questions for Mr. Atkins, and then for Charles Félix.
Au comité, on a entendu.
This week in the committee, we heard from witnesses who spoke about the agro-stability program, and they said that this is one of the programs where there are the most issues, and it's the only program in the suite of programs for BRM that takes into consideration economic disruptions globally in supply chains. So we proposed an additional tax credit for costs incurred to face these issues, and which we know, unfortunately, they will persist given the current economic and geopolitical context. These eligible costs could be, for example, changing our crops because of the canola tariffs, for example, facing various challenges involving storage, exploring new markets, transportation, and so on. So what do you think about this, Mr. Atkins, and then Mr. Ross?
Certainly because of political factors, they are having to adjust and change. Agri-stability is there as a whole farm insurance program for their revenues, and certainly in some cases, and I'll use the example as canola, that had nothing to do with production. That had everything to do with something that was beyond the farmer's control. Agri-stability certainly provided for that loss in farm income because expenses still have to be paid, whether the crop is in storage or whether the crop is sold. And I think in those cases, there needs to be some form of a, I hate calling it an emergency plan, but an emergency fund that Mr. Ross, I think, spoke earlier about the fact that we can only, farmers can manage so many things, and ranchers. They can't manage that. They can't manage what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. They can't manage what's happening in China. They can manage what's on their farm. So from my standpoint, I think the agri-stability program needs to allow for those changes and those challenges that are outside of the farmer's control.
Okay, thank you so much. We've gone 30 seconds over.
30 seconds. Oh, so could you give us the rest in writing? Donc,
and adding to this study, we appreciate everything you do for agriculture. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yep. Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Merci.